The air in the Thorne family's living room was thick with the scent of old money and fresh disapproval. It was a cavernous space designed to impress and intimidate, with ceilings so high they seemed to be in a different climate and furniture that cost more than a modest home. Ethan sat on a silk-upholstered armchair that felt more like a throne of judgment than a place of rest. Across from him, arranged like a tribunal, were his wife's family. Marcus Thorne, his father-in-law, sat in the center, a bulldog of a man whose success in real estate had carved deep lines of arrogance into his face. Beside him, his wife Eleanor, a woman sculpted from ice and entitlement, held a porcelain teacup with a grip that could have shattered it. Flanking them were Chloe's siblings, Julian and Amelia, carbon copies of their parents' disdain, and then there was Chloe, his wife. She sat slightly apart from her family, a beautiful, tragic island between two warring continents. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She wouldn't meet his eyes. This, they had called it, was an intervention, a word typically reserved for addiction or self-destruction. In their eyes, Ethan was both. He was an addiction Chloe had to be cured of, and his very presence was an act of self-destruction for the Thorne family's pristine legacy. Marcus cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being ground under a heavy boot. "Ethan," he began, the name tasting like something foul in his mouth. "We are here because we love Chloe, and because we can no longer stand by and watch her future circle the drain." Eleanor added, her voice a silken weapon. "A marriage is a partnership, a merger of futures. It is meant to elevate both parties. We feel, and Chloe has come to agree, that this arrangement is no longer solvent." Ethan said nothing. He simply sat, his posture relaxed, his hands resting on his thighs. His gaze was calm, moving from face to face, observing. He was an architect after all. He understood structure, and the structure of this family was rotten to its foundation. They thought this was an ambush, a final decisive move to excise him from their lives. They thought they were passing sentence on a failure, a middling designer clinging to the coattails of their wealth. They didn't know that the man they were dismissing held their entire empire in the palm of his hand. They didn't know that within a few short weeks, their carefully constructed world of privilege and power would come crashing down around them, and he would be the one holding the demolition orders. They saw a quiet, unassuming man in a simple, well-worn suit. They were blind to the titan hiding in plain sight. The family saw his silence as weakness and admission of guilt. They couldn't comprehend that it was the quiet before the storm. He had endured their slights, their condescension, their open contempt for 5 years. He had weathered the storm of their disapproval for the sake of the woman he loved, the woman who now sat silently, allowing this to happen. But patience has a limit, and integrity has a price. They were about to find out he could afford to pay it, and they, it turned out, were bankrupt. Before we watch this family's world unravel, I want to take a moment to welcome you. If you believe that true worth is measured by character, not by a bank account, then hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We're building a community here, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Now, let's get back to the story, because the bill for years of arrogance is about to come due, and it's going to be a spectacular payment. The intervention, as they called it, was not a spontaneous event. It was the culmination of 5 years of escalating humiliations. Ethan remembered their first Christmas as a married couple. The Thorne family gathered in this very room, a towering fir tree dripping with crystal ornaments in the corner. Gifts were exchanged, each one a strategic move in the family's ongoing game of status. Julian received a vintage Patek Philippe watch, Amelia a diamond tennis bracelet that glittered with cold fire. Marcus presented Eleanor with the keys to a new graphite gray Maserati. Then it was Ethan's turn. Eleanor had handed him a large flat box wrapped in garish gold paper. "We noticed your work wardrobe could use a little freshening up, dear," she had chirped, the word dear a thinly veiled insult. He had unwrapped it to find a polyester blend suit from a discount department store, the kind of suit a man wears to his first and likely unsuccessful job interview. It was 2 sizes too large, in a shade of brown that seemed designed to absorb light and joy. The room fell into a loaded silence. Julian snickered into his champagne flute, Marcus looked on with a smug, satisfied smirk. It wasn't a gift, it was a costume. They were dressing him for the part they had assigned him, the charity case. Ethan had looked at the suit, then at Chloe. He saw the flicker of shame in her eyes, the embarrassed blush that crept up her neck. But she said nothing. She gave a tight, forced smile and squeezed his hand under the table, a silent plea for him to play along, to not make a scene. So he had folded the suit neatly, placed it back in its box, and offered a quiet, "Thank you, Eleanor." It was very thoughtful. His voice was even, betraying no anger, but a small, precise entry was made in the ledger of his memory. He didn't need to get angry. He just needed to remember. Then there were the dinners. Marcus loved to hold court at the head of his 20-foot mahogany dining table, pontificating about his latest multi-million-dollar deal. He would inevitably turn the conversation to Ethan's work. "So, Ethan," he'd boom, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin, still designing, what is it, patios, quaint little home extensions? "I'm working on a community library project right now," Ethan would reply calmly. "It's a LEED certified design focused on sustainable materials." Marcus would chuckle, a dismissive rumbling sound. "LEED certified," he'd scoff, as if the term were a childish fantasy. "That's lovely. All those recycled plastics and bamboo floors." Meanwhile, we just broke ground on Thorn Plaza, a 40-story glass and steel monument to actual commerce. "But I'm sure your little library will make a few people very happy." Again, Ethan would look to Chloe. Again, he would see the conflict in her eyes, the desire to defend him warring with a lifetime of conditioned deference to her father. And again, silence won. She would change the subject, asking Amelia about her latest charity gala or Julian about his polo lessons. The moment would pass, leaving Ethan feeling utterly alone at a table crowded with people. Each time he felt a small piece of the foundation of their marriage chip away. He wasn't just being insulted, he was being abandoned, in slow motion, by the one person who had vowed to stand with him. The worst had been the offer from Julian, Chloe's brother, who had been gifted a vice presidency at Thorn Corporation on his 25th birthday, had approached Ethan at a family barbecue, an insufferable air of patronage about him. "Listen, Ethan, I've been thinking," Julian had said, swirling a craft beer he probably couldn't name. "This architecture thing is a tough gig. Long hours, not much pay, unless you're a star. And let's be honest, we're not all stars." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Dad and I were talking. We have an opening in the facilities management department. It's a real job. Stable, good benefits. You'd be overseeing maintenance contracts for our commercial properties. It's not glamorous, but it's a steady paycheck. It would take a lot of pressure off Chloe." The offer hung in the air between them, a masterpiece of condescension. They weren't offering him a hand up. They were offering him a leash, a way to control him, to fold him into their corporate machine in the most menial way possible, forever cementing his status as a subordinate. Ethan had looked past Julian, to where Chloe was talking with her mother. She had seen the exchange. He knew she had. She had to have known what Julian was offering. He waited. He gave her a full 30 seconds to walk over, to intervene, to tell her brother how deeply insulting his offer was. She didn't move. He turned back to Julian, a polite, unreadable smile on his face. "Thank you, Julian. I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm committed to my path. I'll have to decline." Julian had just shaken his head, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Suit yourself. The offer stands if you ever decide to get serious about providing for my sister." That night, in the car on the way home, the silence was a living entity. Ethan finally broke it. "Your brother offered me a job in maintenance." Chloe flinched. "Oh, he probably meant well, Ethan. He just worries." "He meant to put me in my place," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "And you let him." "What was I supposed to do?" she cried, her voice cracking with a frustration that felt misplaced. "Start a fight in the middle of my parents' party? You know what they're like." "I do," Ethan had said, the two words landing with devastating weight. "I know exactly what they're like. The question is, what are you like, Chloe? Who are you when they're in the room?" She had no answer, and in her silence, he had his. Now, back in the Thorn living room, those years of silent complicity had led them here, to an intervention meant to formalize the abandonment that had been happening for years. Marcus leaned forward, assuming the posture of a man about to deliver a coup de grace. "We've had our lawyers draw up the papers," he said, sliding a thick leather-bound folder across the polished coffee table. "It's all very straightforward, and because we are not without compassion and we want to see you land on your feet, we have included a severance." He produced a check from his jacket pocket and placed it on top of the folder. Ethan glanced down. The check was made out to him for $50,000, a sum that, to Marcus, was little more than pocket change. It was a final parting insult, the price of 5 years of his life, the cost of their daughter's failed marriage. "This is for the best, Ethan," Eleanor said softly, her version of kindness more chilling than her husband's open hostility. "Chloe needs to be with someone who can participate in her world, someone of equal standing." Ethan finally moved. He reached forward, but he didn't pick up the check or the folder. Instead, his fingers brushed against a small black moleskin notebook he had placed on the table when he arrived. It was unassuming, its cover worn smooth from use. To them, it was just a sketchbook, a prop for his sad little hobby. They had no idea that the pages within held designs for buildings that had reshaped skylines, concepts that had won the most prestigious awards in his field, and preliminary sketches for a project that was worth more than the entire Thorne Corporation. He looked up, his gaze finally locking onto Chloe's. For the first time, he let her see the profound disappointment in his eyes. He wasn't angry. He was something far worse. He was finished. "No," he said. The word was not loud, but it silenced the room. It was not a plea or a negotiation. It was a statement, final, absolute. Marcus's face darkened. "No? What do you mean, no? This isn't a negotiation, son. This is a notification. I mean, no. I will not be accepting your money," Ethan clarified, his voice still unnervingly calm. "And I will not be signing your papers today." He let his fingers rest on his notebook. "You've all said what you believe to be the truth. You believe I am not good enough. You believe I am a weight on this family. You believe you are acting in Chloe's best interest." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "You are all catastrophically wrong." He then stood up, leaving the check and the folder on the table as if they were trash. "Chloe," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, "when you decide who you are married to, me or them, you know where to find me." He turned and walked out of the room. He didn't slam the door. The quiet click of the latch was louder than any shout could have been. He left behind a room full of stunned, sputtering fury, and one woman finally devastatingly alone with the consequences of her own silence. The intervention was over. The real reckoning was just beginning. The days that followed Ethan's departure were a strange purgatory for Chloe. The Thorne mansion, once a symbol of security and comfort, now felt like a gilded prison. Her family treated his exit as a victory. They celebrated with champagne that evening, toasting to Chloe's bright new future. They spoke of setting her up with sons of business partners, of lavish trips to Europe to clear her head. They acted as if a tumor had been excised. But for Chloe, it felt like an amputation. The silence in their large, shared home, a modern minimalist house that Ethan had designed and they had built together, was deafening. Every clean line, every perfectly placed window that captured the morning light was a testament to the man they had driven away. It was his talent, his vision, that had created the only space where she had ever felt truly at peace, a space her family had always dismissed as a bit cold. She tried to heed her father's advice. She went to lunch with her mother, who prattled on about the upcoming charity auction. She met her brother for drinks, where Julian boasted about a new deal he'd supposedly closed. But it all felt hollow, like watching a play where all the actors had forgotten their real emotions. They were performing a life of success, but the script was vapid and the characters were cruel. She found herself replaying every slight, every condescending remark Ethan had endured. She saw them now not as isolated incidents, but as a systematic campaign of psychological warfare, and her role in it became painfully clear. She hadn't been a neutral party. She had been a silent enabler, a human shield for her family's cruelty. Her inaction had been a form of consent. The thought was a shard of ice in her gut. Meanwhile, at the Thorn Corporation, Marcus was becoming increasingly agitated. His bravado about ousting Ethan masked a growing desperation. His company, while appearing robust on the surface, was over-leveraged and bleeding money. Several high-risk developments had failed to yield their projected returns, and a major competitor was eating into his market share. His legacy and his fortune was tied to one last monumental gamble, the Thorn Legacy Tower. It was to be the tallest, most luxurious residential skyscraper in the city, a crowning achievement that would cement his name in the annals of real estate history, and more importantly, attract a massive influx of foreign investment capital that would save his company from insolvency. But there was a problem. To attract that level of investment, he needed more than just height and luxury. He needed prestige. He needed a name, an architect whose very involvement would be a global news story. He had approached every starchitect in the world, Frank Gehry, Norman Foster, Zaha Hadid's firm. They had all politely declined, citing full schedules or creative differences. His project was seen as too commercial, too brazenly about ego. The one firm he believed could deliver the necessary prestige, the one name that was whispered with a kind of reverence in the architectural world, remained elusive: Ethelred Designs. Ethelred was a mystery. The firm had no public face, no flashy website. Its founder was known only by the pseudonym Ethelred, an Anglo-Saxon name meaning noble counsel. The firm took on only a handful of projects at a time, and their work was revolutionary. Buildings that seemed to merge with nature, that produced more energy than they consumed, that were both breathtakingly beautiful and profoundly human. To have an Ethelred building was the ultimate status symbol, not of wealth, but of taste and foresight. Marcus had been trying to get a meeting with Ethelred for 6 months. His letters went unanswered. His calls were politely rebuffed by a discreet legal office that handled their inquiries. It was driving him to distraction. One evening, he was ranting about it at the dinner table. These people at Ethelred, who do they think they are? Holier than thou artists. This isn't some community garden. It's a billion-dollar project, the biggest thing this city has ever seen. Chloe, pushing a piece of salmon around her plate, listened with a growing sense of unease. What's so special about their designs? She asked quietly. Special? Marcus scoffed. They're the whole package: critical acclaim, environmental awards, rich people falling all over themselves to get in. They don't just build buildings, they build legends. If I land Ethelred, the Thorn Legacy Tower is a guaranteed success. Without them, it's just another tall building. Eleanor chimed in. It's a matter of branding, dear, like having a Birkin bag instead of just a purse. The name itself is the value. The conversation washed over Chloe, but a strange memory was surfacing. She remembered a night a few months ago. Ethan had been sketching furiously in his black moleskin notebook, a habit he had when an idea seized him. She had glanced over his shoulder. He was drawing a tower, a tall, slender building that twisted elegantly toward the sky, its facade covered in a lattice of greenery and what looked like solar panels woven into the glass itself. What's that? She had asked. Just an idea, he'd murmured, lost in his work. A concept for a self-sustaining residential skyscraper. A vertical forest in the middle of a concrete jungle. It's beautiful, she had said, genuinely awestruck. It looks alive. He had smiled, a rare, unguarded smile of pure creative joy. That's the point. At the time, she'd thought of it as just one of his many theoretical projects, the quaint little hobbies her father mocked. But now, listening to her father's description of Ethelred's work, a cold, unsettling feeling began to creep up her spine. The description, buildings that merge with nature, sustainable, legendary, it sounded exactly like Ethan's passion. It sounded like the tower he had been sketching. She dismissed the thought as absurd, a coincidence. Ethan was a talented, small-scale architect. Ethelred was a global phenomenon. It was impossible. But the seed of the idea had been planted. Ethan, for his part, was not idle. He had moved into a suite at a private long-stay hotel. The first person he called was not a lawyer or a friend, but a quiet elderly gentleman named Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch had been the Thorn family's lawyer for decades, a man of unimpeachable integrity who had handled their trusts and estates. Marcus considered him a loyal, if somewhat stuffy, fixture. What Marcus didn't know was that 10 years ago, a brilliant young architect had come to Mr. Finch with a unique request. He wanted to build a firm under a pseudonym to create a legal firewall between his work and his personal life. He wanted his designs to be judged on their merit, not on the personality or connections of their creator. Mr. Finch, intrigued by the young man's talent and principled stand against the cult of personality, had agreed. He had set up the labyrinthine corporate structure and the blind trusts that made Ethelred Designs a fortress of anonymity. That young architect had been Ethan. "Alistair," Ethan said over the phone, his voice calm and measured. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end. Then Finch's dry, precise voice. "The intervention, I take it, did not go well?" "It went exactly as we predicted," Ethan replied. "Marcus has made his move. Now we make ours." "His desperation regarding the Legacy Tower project is reaching its peak," Finch noted. "He has sent another formal proposal to my office this morning. The financial offer is extravagant." "Let him," Ethan said. "Let him believe he's getting closer. I want him to call a board meeting, a formal one. I want him to announce that he is on the verge of securing Ethelred Designs. I want him to stake his reputation on it in front of his entire company." "You want him to build the stage for his own execution," Finch stated, a hint of admiration in his tone. "He has been building it for 5 years," Ethan said, a cold edge to his voice. "I'm just going to help him hang the lights." Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet, intricate dance took place. Finch's office sent a single cryptic response to the Thorn Corporation, stating that Ethelred Designs is intrigued by the scale of the Legacy Tower and will be observing the project's development with interest. To Marcus, this was a monumental victory. "Intrigued," he roared in his office, waving the letter. "We've got them. They're on the hook." His arrogance, fueled by this sliver of hope, became unbearable. He was certain he was on the cusp of the greatest triumph of his career. He saw the path clearly now: secure Ethelred, build the tower, save his company, and find Chloe a new, more suitable husband. All his problems solved. He decided to do exactly what Ethan had anticipated. He called a full meeting of the Thorn Corporation's board of directors. He also insisted his family be there: Eleanor, Julian, and Chloe. He wanted them to witness his triumph. He framed it as a new chapter for the company and the family. He called Chloe personally. "I need you there, sweetheart. It's important. We're closing a deal that will change everything. It's time to finally put that mess with Ethan behind us and look to the future." Chloe felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The impossible thought she'd had at the dinner table returned. Ethan's drawing of the tower, her father's obsession with Ethelred, Ethan's final cryptic words, "You are all catastrophically wrong." She had to know. That night, she drove to their house. It was dark and empty, but she still had her key. She walked through the silent rooms, her footsteps echoing. She went to Ethan's home office, a space he had always kept meticulously organized. On his desk, a single black moleskin notebook lay next to his pen. Not the one he'd had at the intervention, but another from the collection he kept. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she was crossing a line, invading his privacy. But she had to know if she was going insane. With trembling hands, she opened the notebook. The pages were filled with his elegant, precise script and breathtaking sketches. There were notes on material tensile strengths, wind load calculations, and passive heating and cooling systems. And then she saw it, a full 2-page spread of the twisting living tower from her memory. But this time, it was more detailed. At the top of the page, in Ethan's block lettering, was the project title, Project AE-07, Helix Garden Skyscraper. AE-07. Ethel read. The initials slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. She sank into Ethan's chair, the notebook open in her lap. She flipped through the pages, her world tilting on its axis. She saw sketches of a community library in a low-income neighborhood, a project her father had mocked. Next to it was a clipping from an international architecture journal, showing the completed building and celebrating it as Ethelred Designs' latest pro bono masterpiece. She saw designs for a winery in Napa, a museum in Kyoto, a research center in Antarctica. All of them were real, celebrated buildings. All of them were credited to the enigmatic Ethelred. All of them were born in her husband's quiet, unassuming notebooks. The man her family had called a failure, a charity case, a man not good enough to manage their maintenance contracts, was one of the most respected and influential architects on the planet, and they had just thrown him away like garbage. The humiliation she felt was not for Ethan. It was for herself, for her blindness, her weakness, her colossal, unforgivable foolishness. She had stood by while a pack of ignorant, arrogant bullies tormented a giant. She closed the notebook, her hands shaking. Her father's board meeting was the next day. He was going to stand up in front of his entire company and announce his imminent partnership with Ethelred Designs. He was going to celebrate the capture of the great mysterious architect. And Chloe now knew, with sickening certainty, that the great mysterious architect was the man her father had just tried to pay $50,000 to disappear. The meeting wasn't going to be a triumph. It was going to be an execution. And her whole family had eagerly built the gallows. The morning of the board meeting dawned gray and oppressive, the sky over the city a sheet of brushed steel. Chloe felt as if she hadn't slept at all. The revelations from Ethan's notebook had replayed in her mind all night, a dizzying montage of her husband's secret brilliance and her own spectacular failure. She dressed in a somber gray suit, feeling like she was preparing for a funeral, her own. Her mother, on the other hand, was electric with anticipation. "You look a little pale, dear," Eleanor said, adjusting a pearl necklace. "You should wear some color. This is a celebration. Your father is about to pull off the deal of a lifetime." The drive to the Thorne Corporation headquarters was surreal. Marcus was on the phone, barking orders, his voice brimming with a conqueror's confidence. "Get the champagne on ice and make sure the press release is ready to go. The moment I give the word, I want it sent to every major news outlet." Chloe stared out the window at the city rushing by. She saw the buildings not as concrete and glass, but as ideas. Someone had dreamed them. Someone had sketched them. Someone like Ethan. How many times had she walked past a building without considering the mind that had given it form? She had lived with a master builder and had never truly seen him. The Thorne Corporation boardroom was on the top floor, a space designed to project power. A vast dark wood table, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the room. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The very skyline Marcus intended to dominate with his legacy tower. The board members, a collection of grim-faced men and women in expensive suits, were already seated. They looked tense. They, unlike Marcus's family, had a clearer picture of the company's precarious financial state. The legacy tower was not just a vanity project for them. It was a desperate lifeline. Marcus swept into the room, his family in his wake. "Good morning, everyone," he boomed, taking his place at the head of the table. "Thank you for being here on this momentous day." Chloe took a seat against the wall behind the main table, positioning herself as an observer. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a historical drama whose tragic ending she already knew. Her mother and brother sat with the board, preening, ready to accept the accolades. "As you all know," Marcus began, his voice resonating with manufactured gravitas, "we have faced some headwinds this past year. The market has been challenging, but I have always believed that, in the face of adversity, true leaders don't retreat, they build." He gestured to the window. "Out there, we will build a monument, not just to this company, but to the very spirit of ambition. The Thorne Legacy Tower." A 3D rendering of a generic, glassy skyscraper appeared on the large screen behind him. It was impressive in its size, but utterly soulless. "But, to make this project a global landmark," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "we needed more than steel and glass. We needed genius. We needed a name that stands for excellence, for innovation, for prestige. We needed the one firm that has eluded everyone. We needed Ethelred Designs." A murmur went through the board. This was the linchpin. They all knew it. "For months we have been in delicate negotiations," Marcus lied, puffing out his chest. I can now report that we have their full attention. They are intrigued, to use their own word. I have it on good authority that they are preparing to accept our proposal. Today marks the beginning of a partnership that will secure the future of this corporation for a generation. He was magnificent in his delusion. He paused, basking in the anticipated awe of the room. He looked over at Chloe, giving her a triumphant wink, as if to say, "See, this is real power. This is what you should have married." It was at that precise moment, at the absolute zenith of his hubris, that the boardroom doors opened quietly. A man entered. It was not Ethan. It was Mr. Alistair Finch, the elderly, stoic family lawyer. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace, holding a simple leather folio. His presence was an unexpected punctuation mark in Marcus's grand oration. Marcus's face broke into a wide, relieved grin. "Alistair, perfect timing. Have you brought the preliminary agreement from Ethelred?" Mr. Finch did not smile. He walked to the side of the table, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Marcus's blustering energy. "I have not, Marcus," he said, his voice dry as parchment. "The firm does not use preliminary agreements." Of course, Marcus said, waving a hand dismissively. "Straight to the main contract, even better. A bit unorthodox, but I like their style." "I am here," Mr. Finch continued, ignoring Marcus, "in my capacity as legal counsel for Ethelred Designs." The board members sat up straighter. This was it. "My client has been observing your company and the Legacy Tower proposal with great interest," Finch said. "He has reviewed your financials, your projections, and your corporate culture." Marcus beamed, preening. "Excellent. So, he's ready to sign?" "Mister?" Finch turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping over the room before landing, with unnerving precision, on the empty chair beside Chloe. "He is ready to make his decision, but he felt it was only appropriate to do so in person." A heavy silence fell. The air grew thick with anticipation, and then the door opened again. Ethan walked in. He was dressed in the same simple dark suit he had worn at the intervention. It was impeccably tailored, Chloe now realized, not expensive, but perfect. He carried no briefcase, no folder, only the worn black moleskin notebook, which he held loosely in one hand. The room was paralyzed with confusion. Marcus stared, his mouth slightly agape. "What the hell is he doing here?" he snarled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Security." Ethan didn't look at Marcus. He walked calmly to the head of the table, opposite his father-in-law. His eyes met Chloe's for a fleeting second, and in them she saw no anger, only a deep, abiding sorrow. "There's no need for security, Marcus," Mr. Finch said calmly. He then turned to Ethan, his expression one of deep, formal respect. He dipped his head in a slight bow. "Mr. Ethelred," he said, his voice clear and resonant, echoing in the stunned silence. "The board is assembled. They are ready for your decision." The quiet bomb had detonated. The words "Mr. Ethelred" hung in the air, seeming to warp the very reality of the room. For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute silence. Not a cough, not a shuffle of paper, just the collective, stunned intake of breath. Marcus Thorne looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face, which had been flushed with triumph, drained of all color, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. His eyes darted from Ethan to Mr. Finch and back again, his mind refusing to process the information. What did you call him?" he stammered, the words catching in his throat. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her pearl suddenly feeling like a noose. Julian, who had been smirking moments before, now looked like a schoolboy who had just been caught setting a fire. The board members, however, were processing the new reality with the cold, swift calculus of survival. Their expressions shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension, and then to a laser-focused intensity. They weren't seeing their CEO's embarrassing son-in-law anymore. They were seeing the world-renowned mythical architect they had been praying for. They were seeing their savior. Ethan placed his black notebook on the polished table. The small, simple object seemed to possess an immense gravity. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, directly opposite Marcus. It was a silent, devastating assumption of power. "Ethelred is not my name," Ethan began, his voice even and measured, cutting through the thick silence. It is a principle. It means noble counsel. It was a reminder to myself, when I started my firm 10 years ago, that the purpose of building is not to create monuments to ego, but to serve the community with integrity and foresight. He looked directly at Marcus, a principle you have never understood. He then opened the notebook. He didn't need to. The information was etched into his memory. Thorn Corporation, he said, addressing the board now, his tone shifting from personal to professional, is on the verge of collapse. Panic flared in the eyes of several board members. Marcus shot up from his chair. That is a slanderous lie. This company is stronger than ever. Is it? Ethan countered, his voice remaining level. He flipped a page in his notebook. You have a debt-to-equity ratio of 3.8, hidden through a series of offshore shell corporations. Your last 3 major residential projects have an occupancy rate below 60%. You lost the bid for the city's waterfront redevelopment project, a fact you failed to disclose at the last quarterly meeting, costing the company an estimated $200 million in projected revenue. The Thorn Legacy Tower is not a victory lap, gentlemen. It's a Hail Mary pass. It is the only thing standing between this company and bankruptcy. Each statement was a hammer blow, cracking the facade of Marcus's empire. The board members looked at Marcus, their expressions hardening from concern to accusation. They had been lied to. How could you possibly know that? Julian sputtered, his voice thin and reedy. Ethan turned his gaze on him. Because before I became an architect, I was a financial analyst specializing in risk assessment for development projects. I hide my identity, not my intelligence. He looked back at the board. I know this because Mr. Finch, on my behalf, commissioned a full independent audit of your company as part of our due diligence. Your books are a disaster. Marcus sank back into his chair, defeated. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a gray, clammy dread. He was exposed, utterly and completely. So, Ethan continued, we have established the reality of the situation. Thorn Corporation needs this tower, but more than that, it needs a complete change in leadership and philosophy. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Ethelred Designs will take on the project. A collective sigh of relief went through the board, a lifeline. But, Ethan added, and the room tensed again, only on my terms, and my terms are not negotiable. He stood up and began to pace slowly behind his chair, his presence now commanding the entire room. Term 1. Marcus Thorn will resign as CEO and from the board of directors, effective immediately. He will have no further role in this company. You can't do that, Eleanor shrieked, her icy composure finally shattering. This is his company. He built it. He built it on a foundation of reckless debt and deceit, Ethan corrected her calmly, without raising his voice. And he is about to run it into the ground. The board can choose to go down with him, or they can choose survival. It's up to them. He looked at the grim faces around the table. He knew he had them. Term 2, he went on. Julian Thorn will also be removed from his position as vice president. His role will be dissolved. He glanced at Julian. Facilities management, I believe, is in need of a new junior contract overseer. Perhaps you can apply for your old job offer to me, if you're serious about providing for yourself. The parallel was brutal, a perfect cutting echo of Julian's own condescending words. Julian flushed crimson and looked down at the table, utterly humiliated. Ethan stopped pacing and placed his hands on the back of his chair. Now came the part that was not for the board, but for the family, for his own soul. He looked at Marcus, then Eleanor. For 5 years, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, I have been a guest in your home. I have sat at your table, and you have treated me with nothing but contempt. You judged my worth not by my character, my integrity, or my love for your daughter, but by the balance of my bank account, which you presumed to be meager. This was the list of grievances, not shouted in anger, but stated as cold, hard facts. Marcus, you mocked my little projects. One of those little projects, the community library, won the Pritzker Prize last year. It is the highest honor in my profession. The prize money alone was more than your generous $50,000 severance check. Eleanor, he said, turning to her, You gifted me a cheap suit to remind me that I was beneath you. The suit I am wearing today was a gift from the Crown Prince of Dubai, in gratitude for the carbon-neutral desert palace I designed for his family. He apologized that it was only off the rack. The room was silent, save for Eleanor's ragged breathing. You tried to end my marriage because you believed I was holding Chloe back from a life of status and privilege. The entire time, you were desperately, pathetically trying to gain the attention of a man you were simultaneously trying to kick out of your family. The irony is staggering. He let that sink in. He let them sit with the full, crushing weight of their own blindness and prejudice. This was the moral mirror, and the reflection it showed was ugly and distorted. You don't respect architecture, he said to Marcus, his voice filled with a professional's disdain. You respect brand names. You wanted the Ethelred name to slap onto your soulless monument to greed. You would have hated a real Ethelred building. It would have had a community garden on the roof and affordable housing units on the lower floors. It would have been built to serve people, not your ego. Finally, he turned his attention to the last person, the one who mattered most. He walked around the table until he was standing behind Chloe. She flinched as he approached, but didn't look up. He spoke, his voice low, meant only for her, but audible to everyone in the dead silent room. And you, he said, the word heavy with the weight of 5 years of disappointment. You watched it all happen, every insult, every humiliation. You stood by and said nothing. You chose their fragile pride over our shared dignity. You chose their wealth over our love. You let them convince you that my quietness was weakness and their noise was strength. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table in front of her. It was his key to their house. This is the consequence, Chloe. Not just for them, but for us. Their empire is crumbling because of their arrogance. Our marriage is crumbling because of your silence. He paused. The board has a choice to make, and so do you. You can stay here, with them, and what's left of their name, or you can stand up right now and walk out of this room with your husband. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back on her, on all of them, and walked towards the door. He had laid his terms, he had spoken his truth. The power had shifted completely. Now, all that was left was to see who would be crushed in the wreckage and who would have the courage to rebuild. The moment Ethan's hand touched the doorknob, the spell that had held the room captive shattered. The first to break was Chloe. A sob, raw and painful, escaped her lips. It was the sound of a dam breaking after years of holding back a flood of shame and regret. All eyes turned to her. She looked at the key on the table. It was simple, brass, worn from use. It represented their home, their life, everything she had allowed to be jeopardized. Then she looked at her family. Her father, a Titan just moments ago, was now a shrunken, gray-faced old man, staring into the abyss of his own making. Her mother was weeping silently, not out of empathy, but out of the sheer horror of their social and financial ruin. Her brother Julian just stared blankly, a boy in a man's suit, completely out of his depth. They were not giants. They were just loud, frightened people, and she had let their fears dictate her life. With a resolve that surprised even herself, Chloe stood up. The scraping of her chair was the only sound. She didn't look at her parents. She couldn't. Her gaze was fixed on Ethan's back. She walked around the table, her steps steady and sure. She didn't run. She walked with the dignity she should have shown years ago. When she reached the door, she stopped beside him. She didn't touch him. She just said, her voice trembling but clear, "I'm with you, Ethan. I am so sorry. I'm with you." Ethan paused for a fraction of a second, then opened the door. He held it for her, and she walked through. He followed, closing it gently behind them, leaving the ruins of the Thorne dynasty to its fate. Inside the boardroom, chaos erupted. "What do we do?" one board member demanded, looking at the remaining shell-shocked Thornes with undisguised contempt. "He's got us," another said, running a hand through his hair. "The audit, if that gets out, we're finished. The banks will call in our loans before lunch." "So we agree?" The first one pressed. "We accept his terms? All of them?" Marcus looked up, a flicker of his old fight returning. "You can't be serious. You're going to hand my company over to him?" A formidable woman at the end of the table, who had been silent until now, fixed Marcus with a glacial stare. It is no longer your company, Marcus. You have systematically lied to this board, misrepresented our financial position, and alienated the one person who could save us. Your leadership has been a catastrophic failure. Yes, we accept his terms. She looked around the table, all in favor of accepting Mr. Ethelred's proposal, including the immediate removal of Marcus and Julian Thorne from their positions. Every hand on the board went up. Instantly, without hesitation, it was a bloodless, brutal coup. Eleanor let out a small, wounded cry. It was over. In the space of 15 minutes, their entire world had been dismantled. The power, the prestige, the name, all of it gone. In the hallway, Chloe and Ethan walked towards the elevator in silence. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. When the elevator arrived and the doors closed, sealing them in the small private space, Chloe finally broke down completely. The tears she had been holding back streamed down her face. Ethan, I don't know what to say, she stammered through her sobs. Sorry isn't enough. It will never be enough. I was weak, and I was a coward. I saw what they were doing, and I let my fear of them be bigger than my love for you. I don't deserve you. Ethan stood quietly, watching her. He didn't rush to comfort her, to offer easy forgiveness. He let her feel the full weight of her confession. When her sobs began to subside, he finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. No, he said, you don't. Not the man you were married to. That man needed a partner, an ally, and he didn't have one. He paused. But maybe you can deserve the man I'm going to be, now that I don't have to hide. The elevator doors opened onto the ground floor lobby. It was a vast marble expanse, and in the center, under the massive Thorne Corporation logo, stood Marcus, Eleanor, and Julian. They had fled the boardroom and were waiting for one last confrontation. Marcus stepped forward as Ethan and Chloe approached. His face was a mess of fury and pleading. Chloe, you can't do this, he begged, his voice hoarse. He's turned you against us. We're your family. You stopped being my family when you decided my husband's worth was measured in dollars, Chloe replied, her voice gaining strength. You asked me to choose. I have. Eleanor, her face streaked with mascara, tried a different tactic. Think of everything we've given you. This life, the status. Are you going to throw it all away for him, after he just humiliated us? He didn't humiliate you, Chloe said, the truth of it landing with crystalline clarity in her own mind. He just held up a mirror. You humiliated yourselves. Ethan stepped forward, shielding Chloe slightly. He looked at the three of them, and for the first time, he felt not anger or disappointment, but a kind of pity. It was never about the money, Marcus, he said. I never cared about your wealth. I fell in love with your daughter. That's all that should have mattered. I would have lived in a small apartment and designed patios for the rest of my life if it meant she was happy and respected our life together. You're the one who couldn't stand that. Your pride demanded more. Well, now you have less. He took Chloe's hand. Her fingers curled around his, a desperate, grateful grip. Goodbye, Marcus. They turned and walked away, leaving the Thorne family standing, utterly defeated, under the monument to a name that no longer held any power. The months that followed were a period of radical reconstruction, both for the company and for the marriage. Ethan, now openly at the helm of his firm, Ethelred Designs, took control of the Legacy Tower project. He began by tearing up Marcus's original designs. The soulless glass box was replaced by the breathtaking Helix Garden concept from his notebook. The board, now deeply loyal to him, approved every change without question. The project was no longer about ego. It was about creating a new, sustainable, and inclusive landmark for the city. He restructured Thorne Corporation from the ground up. He renamed it Keystone Development, a name that reflected a commitment to foundational strength and integrity. The corrupt and incompetent executives loyal to Marcus were fired. Talented, ethical people were promoted. He implemented a profit-sharing program for all employees and established a foundation, funded by a percentage of all project profits, to build affordable housing and public spaces across the city. He wasn't just saving the company, he was giving it a soul. For Chloe, the reconstruction was more personal. She did not ask for an easy return to their life. She knew she had to earn her way back. She started by cutting off financial ties to her parents. She took a job, not a high-powered position gifted to her, but an entry-level role at a nonprofit that worked with the new Keystone Foundation. She wanted to understand the work Ethan valued, to contribute in a meaningful way. She and Ethan went to counseling. In those sessions, she didn't make excuses. She owned her silence, her complicity. She explored the deep-seated fear of her father that had governed her for so long. It was a painful, arduous process, but with each session, another layer of the thorn legacy was peeled away, revealing the woman she was meant to be underneath. Their evenings were quiet. They were rebuilding their intimacy brick by brick. They talked, truly talked, for the first time in years. She asked him about his designs, about the philosophy behind Ethelred, about the years he had spent hiding his genius. He listened as she talked about her work, her hopes, her shame. There was no grand cinematic moment of forgiveness. Instead, it was a slow, gradual dawning of a new kind of love. One built not on romantic ideals, but on the hard, solid ground of shared truth and mutual respect. One evening, about a year after the boardroom confrontation, Ethan took Chloe to the construction site of the Helix Garden Tower. It was late, and the city glittered around them. The foundation was laid, and the first few floors of the intricate steel skeleton were rising into the night sky. They stood on a platform overlooking the site. "I never showed you the final plans," Ethan said, unrolling a blueprint. "I wanted you to see them here." She looked at the designs. She saw the twisting tower, the vertical gardens, the soaring atrium. But she also saw details she hadn't noticed before. The lower 10 floors were designated as mixed-income housing. The rooftop, which Marcus had envisioned as a lavish private penthouse, was now a public observatory and garden, free to all city residents. A portion of the commercial space on the ground floor was reserved for a new branch of the city's public library. "It's not a monument to a name anymore," Ethan said quietly, watching her face. "It's a gift to the city." Chloe looked from the blueprint to the rising structure, and finally to her husband. His face was illuminated by the city lights, his expression calm and content. She saw him then, fully. Not the failure her family had tried to create, not the secret genius he had been forced to be, but just Ethan. A good man, a brilliant man, her husband. "You didn't just save a company, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're building a better world." "I'm trying," he said with a small smile. "One building at a time." She reached out and took his hand. This time, her grip wasn't desperate. It was steady. "Can I help?" she asked. He squeezed her hand, his eyes full of a love that was deeper and stronger than anything they had ever had before. "You already are," he said. They stood there for a long time, watching the cranes move balletically against the night sky, watching the welders' sparks fly like fireflies. They were no longer defined by the past, by the cruelty of others, or by their own mistakes. They were defined by what they were building, together, right now. A new foundation, a stronger structure, a future with a breathtaking view. The fall of the House of Thorn was as quiet as it was complete. Stripped of his company and his reputation, Marcus found his social circle evaporated overnight. The friends who had once clapped him on the back now crossed the street to avoid him. Their vast mansion, leveraged to the hilt, was sold to cover his personal debts. Marcus and Eleanor moved into a modest condominium, a property, ironically, that had been developed by their chief competitor. Eleanor did not handle the descent well. Without the armor of wealth and status, she seemed to wither. Her life, once a whirlwind of galas and committees, became a quiet procession of empty days. Julian, cast out of the corporate world he was never equipped for, struggled. He bounced between low-level jobs, his arrogance a poor substitute for actual skill. The family was broken, not by Ethan's revenge, but by the weight of their own character. They had built their house on sand, and the tide had come in. Ethan and Chloe never spoke of them with malice. They were simply a chapter of the past, a lesson learned in the harshest way possible. Their own story was now one of forward momentum. Chloe excelled at her work with the foundation, discovering a passion and a talent for community outreach she never knew she possessed. She became a vital part of the new company's soul, ensuring that its growth was always tied to its social mission. The Helix Garden Tower was completed 2 years later. It was an instant global icon, celebrated not just for its beauty, and engineering, but for its spirit. It was a symbol of a new kind of success, one where profit and principle were not mutually exclusive. On the day of its grand opening, there was no lavish, exclusive party. Instead, the building was opened to the public. Thousands of city residents lined up to visit the rooftop observatory, to walk through the public atrium, to check out a book from the new library. From that rooftop garden, looking out over the sprawling city, Ethan and Chloe watched the crowds below. They were holding hands, their fingers interlaced. Their marriage, like the tower they stood upon, had been deconstructed down to its weakest points, its faulty foundations exposed. But they had chosen to rebuild. They had replaced the crumbling facade with honest, transparent materials. They had reinforced the structure with trust and forgiveness. And the result was something stronger, more beautiful, and more authentic than they could have ever imagined. The story of Ethan and Chloe is a powerful reminder that the world often tries to judge us by superficial metrics, our job title, our bank account, the company we keep. But true worth is not something that can be displayed. It is quiet. It is built day by day through integrity, patience, and character. It is the solid foundation beneath the surface that allows one to withstand any storm. Arrogance makes a lot of noise, but it builds nothing that lasts. True strength is often silent, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself not through words, but through action. It reminds us that the most powerful interventions aren't the ones staged to tear someone down, but the ones staged to build something better in its place. What do you think? Was Ethan's response justified, or should he have been more forgiving? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. Thank you for watching, and remember to measure your own life not by its appearance, but by the strength of its foundation.